On this episode of the Quantum Podcast, I have on sleep expert Nick Littlehales. Nick is one of the pioneers of the sleep industry in high-performance sport. Back in the 1990s, Nick went into Manchester United Carrington training ground to speak to Sir Alex Ferguson to try and pitch a job that didn't exist, which was a sleep performance coach. After helping out one of the players at United at the time go from back injury to performing at his best again, Nick became world renowned for what he did and has gone on to work with clubs and different sports all over the world. His take on sleep is definitely interesting. It's different from what we usually talk about with your typical 8 hours of sleep per night. He talks about things such as polyphasic sleeping, which we'll get into in the podcast. We also talk about things such as working with Sir Alex Ferguson, what he was like as a person and how he pitched this job to him that didn't exist. Nick also gives tips on what you should do when you first wake up in the morning and also when we should start drinking caffeine and when we should stop drinking caffeine. I hope you enjoyed this episode with Nick Littlehales, and remember to please like, subscribe and share the podcast with anyone who may be interested, as this just helps to grow the channel and the podcast itself. Thank you for listening, and please find Nick's details in the description below. Thank you. You are a sleep expert. And you've been a sleep expert for over 2 decades now, if that's right. So,
yep.
starting in an industry that wasn't as big as it is now, how did you become the sleep coach that you are?
Like you say, it's a long time ago. Almost like 23 years now. But it was the late 90s. I sort of fell into the sleep industry as we would know it. It was very much predominantly around products. There was the clinical side of sleep, but in general terms, it was about, isolated interventions like, things for the bedroom and stuff like that. Sports science was, not even a word. Data collection, things like that. It was very much all about sort of natural talent back in those days. And I'd spent a career with a big company as an international sales and marketing director. I'd traveled the world. I'd worked in certain areas of the sleep industry, but I'm not necessarily a clinical or academic expert, but I learned a hell of a lot. And I think at a certain point, I just realized that, not a performance criteria, sleep taken for granted. It was very difficult to change that perception in that health pillar. So I decided to go off and do something completely different. And just during that particular time, I bumped into a football club called Manchester United Football Club. They happened to be the local football club to my UK office in the UK. I'd done a little thing like sponsor a local football team for their shirts, which created a bit of media fun because we were a sleep company and it was a football club. And I had a conversation with Alex Ferguson way back then. And I think it was any other manager at the time, any other club, that sort of little conversation about sleep and recovery and mental and physical stuff would have just left itself in that conversation. But he was in the early stages of adopting new things, things outside of the sport, let's say, as they knew it at the time. So that started a conversation, and I started to just pass on my interpretations, let's say, Ethan, of what I'd learnt, trying to, find a way that somebody could move from taking it for granted to trying to make it, more optimize it. Why not? It's over 30% of the day. So we should be able to find something in there that would help with overall performance. And then the journey just began. It was a little bit of, the media having a bit of fun. Like there's a guy wandering around talking to football players about sleep. I really didn't know what I was doing. And eventually, the more times I confronted sport and was involved with sport and had conversations with individual players or manager or coaches, there was people like Arsene Wenger who came along into UK football and had a completely different approach. So it was just in the early days when things started to shift, and that journey's been going on ever since. And like you say, nowadays sleep is a sleep and recovery is a big subject. There's a
It's
lot
the most
more out
talked about
there
thing.
for everybody. So there's a lot more we're aware of, but I think we still have to remind ourselves we're on the very early steps of this health pillar, and where we get a lot of education, a lot of research around nutrition and exercise and mental stuff in those areas. We're still very much at the early stages of this, so we know it's important. We know how it can affect our performance, but we're still on those little baby steps of how do we really define it for each other, for anybody in the population around the world, never mind sport.
Yeah. So you obviously you said you worked with Sir Alex Ferguson, who is renowned for being one of the most brutal people of his time in the world of football. So how did you pitch a job that didn't exist to a man who was renowned for being as brutal as he was?
Wow, good question, to be honest. I mean, not to generically label everybody, but he was a tough Scotsman, came from a background of work hard, be honest, disciplined, you don't get anything for nothing type of thing. And he was in a world where some of those characteristics really meant something to him and to performance in sport. So whilst you had all this, pomp and ceremony and stuff around sport and footballers, he tried to keep it grounded. So I think it was nothing more than my background. It was not the same as his, but I was very much an independent person, at school, focused around sport. I tried to do something different to everybody else in my demographic at that time. Trying to become a sportsman in the late 80s, early 80s, sorry, late 70s. So I think my journey and my enthusiasm to go, well, if I'm being told to do this, but actually I can't do anything with it, then there must be another way of doing it. So I think it was that little sort of characteristic of being honest, trustworthy, grounded, and determined to change something, and it's a long time ago, Ethan, but I assume it's, you don't get into his space unless he trusts you, and you are honest, and you will stand up for yourself. I don't know, it's those kind of characteristics, but he's also a really, really nice and friendly family guy who, I think we just hit it off at the time, that's all.
Yeah. So you've obviously worked with a lot of high performers through your time. So what's the main thing that you've learned over that 20+ year period of working with high performers?
I think there's sort of two sides to it, Ethan. There's one that you don't have to coach them about nutrition and exercise and committing to something, right? That's more difficult for the rest of the population because we let lots of variables get in the way. So it's I think the big thing was to change their perception of what sleep is, right? And you say sleep to an athlete and they go, oh, that's something I do when there's nothing else better to do. And it's just to shift it. So the first sort of challenge was to deal with it as human recovery performance, mental and physical resilience, recovery. It's a period of time when you are actually training, it's not doing nothing. Your brain's in control of this period. So what are you doing while you're in your wake state to help your brain to go into that training period when you're effectively not there, if you know what I mean? So it was combining that sort of mindset together of in any 24-hour period, there are things that we should be doing to help the brain when it goes into when it goes into that training period when you're asleep, and against some of the things you're doing in your wake state. And if you get the balance a little better, a little bit more harmony about mental and physical activities and mental and physical recovery activities, then there is a different you as an individual, as a human. So it's kind of that reflection on we are human beings with biological functions. We do live on a planet. We are connected with, sort of circadian rhythms and the sun going around the planet. And our synchronization to that is quite key to our overall performance. So trying to bring those two things a little bit together. And I think over the last 2 decades, I've gone from no phone to look where we are today. So it's been a quite a dramatic shift over the last 2 decades in how our own personal space is being invaded, if not completely invaded, by our ability to be in a 24/7 world. And I think that's the sort of realization for an athlete, is to create recovery, which is not about doing nothing. It's about that training program. It's about performance. It's about more consistent, sustainable levels of performance. And sometimes, it is a little bit short term for athletes, because there is a trial, there's an event, there is some championships, there's Olympics, there's things that they're trying to reach ultimate peak performance at a particular time in a particular. So they do have those sort of dynamics of time scale, not necessarily the long term issues of doing certain things now that might be harmful later.
Yeah.
That has changed a little bit more, because athletes want to still be doing triathlons at 60 and 70 years old. They still want to be playing football at the top flight in their late 30s, even early 40s. So generally, we want to be more concerned about the future and our health. But in an athlete's world, it's probably, can you get me to that moment in time in my best possible shape? Because that is my moment in time. It's the 100-meter final at the Olympics. If I can't get to the final, that's one thing. If then in the final I'm not ready for that, it's almost a complete waste of time coming second.
Yeah.
So you do get that really driven dynamics. And I think that's where a lot of us can reflect on how we approach sleep, is that, if you are doing certain things, not in a crazy way, but if you're doing certain things and you've got a better awareness and understanding, wow, there's a different you hiding away. It's like a little shadow. You think you're at your best, you think you're successful, you think you're doing everything in the positive way. But if you ever knew there was a 10% in there for you, in whatever way you'd like to describe that, then wow, you want to go and get it, don't you?
Yeah, 100%. So I listened to the audio version of your book Sleep in the past week in preparation for this, and I was fascinated by some of the things that you went into in terms of how you describe sleep, because it's not along the conventional path of which we're told to see sleep, in terms of you need to get your 8 hours of sleep, and if you don't get your 8 hours of sleep, let's panic and all this sort of stuff. But before I get into that, I would like you to sort of describe what is circadian rhythm and what types of sleep can we get.
Well, I think, like we probably touched on, at the end of our fingertips, we can learn, whether it's fake or real, anything we want, and we can access anything we want. There's a lot more research and documentation around sleep and its importance. A thing that always fascinated me, that no clinical expert could ever give me a defined approach. It was sort of, we all have to get our 8 hours, anything less and we're going to die, sort of thing. Bedrooms at 16 to 18 degrees, don't eat too late. Subsequently, things like don't be on your tech too long because of blue light. So there was always these sort of little sort of things about what we should be doing, but they were really, really defined to some of those things rather than, and pre-sleep routines, and I almost thought, well, isn't that too late? There's no point training after the events, is there? It never really fitted. So I think circadian rhythms was one of those educational points. And I suppose I'd ask you, Ethan, to reflect on how much you've been thinking about sleep in your educational formative growth years journey. I mean, you're talking to me today, but the vast majority would not have conversations about sleep other than you had a bad one last night, or you had a good one last night, or you feel okay. The number 8 seems to be so ingrained. If you ask anybody how many hours sleep do they try and get, they'll say 8. They don't really know why, but it just sounds like the best number to pick.
Yeah.
So I think when you start looking at circadian rhythms, you can go into a very sort of specific scientific look at that. But if you bring it all the way back to the top surface, it's a human being with biological functions on a planet. There's a sun going around the planet that creates light, dark, diminished light, and timing. It happens all the time. It triggers the planet to unsuppress itself and become awake. There are various people who live in different places within that, circadian rhythm. So as the sun goes around our planet and seasonal changes, you've got northern hemisphere and southern hemisphere, you've got equator, you've got this and that. So there's a lot of variations to that natural circadian rhythm. But the thing that it creates is, I think most people would understand that creates a clock. It's a timing. The sun doesn't care about us, as individuals or humans. It simply creates this sunrise, sunset process. And within that, we have an internal clock. And our internal clock is triggered by that process to do certain biological functions, particularly about adrenaline, cortisol, serotonin, our relationship with light and diminished light and blue light, and appetite, mood, motivation. So I think the sort of circadian rhythm area is just to have that connection with what's going on, outside, because we live inside. And that general relationship, that has never changed, and it never will. It doesn't matter what technology we create. I say that with some caveat, because in today's world, you never know what we're going to create. But in general terms, that's never going to change. So that sort of relationship. And when you look at it, there is a rhythm to that. We put a 24-hour clock on it. So there is this sort of rhythm to 24 hours. It's not necessarily about Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. It is a rhythm to 24 hours. It's your rhythm with that 24 hours. It's your knowledge of how you can optimize what's going on within those 24 hours and understanding there's certain triggers. And the one thing that I think you can really then start to fine tune is your understanding that within that 24 hours, there are, you can call them hours. I call them 90-minute cycles because that's what happens in a clinic. Within a 90-minute cycle, your brain will develop certain stages of sleep. They're all beneficial to you in recovery words, but there are some deep sleep, to keep it simple, REM sleep. It's only 20% of any period, right? But it's where you're almost semi-paralyzed and your brain can really start to repair you, for the sake of argument, right? Really put things and repair and rejuvenate everything about you. So that's what you're hunting for, right? And in your formative growth years, it just happens naturally, right? Because the brain's in control. As soon as you shift into sort of adolescence, then we bring other things in that sort of then counterbalances that process. So when you look at it, if you think a 90-minute cycle and you take a sort of anchor point to your day, like sunrise is, and you have your own anchor point, your most consistent start to your day, how you feel about starting your day, and you chop it up into 16 cycles, 16 90-minute cycles, you create some rhythm. The first cycle of your day from your anchor point, the second cycle, third cycle, then you go all the way around to maybe there's 5 cycles left before your anchor point again, right? And 5 90-minute cycles is 7.5 hours. So then you have a bit more of a, oh, there's my 8-hour thing, right? But you've got these little timings. But then what you can reflect on in that circadian area is the first 2 cycles of your allocated sleep time is where your brain is most likely to go looking for those deeper sleep stages. So if my anchor point's 6:30, I've got 16 cycles, 16 90-minute cycles. So 5 90-minute cycles is 11 o'clock into 6:30 at the end, right? Into my last cycle, the 16th one into 6:30. So between 11 and 12:30, and 12:30 and 2 a.m., the first 2 90-minutes is where my brain goes hunting for that good stuff. What it doesn't keep doing is hunting for it in the back end of the third cycle or the fourth or the fifth, because those are wake cycles. So immediately your perception shifts with a little bit of knowledge about circadian rhythms, a little bit of that 24-hour rolling process, a little bit of your relationship with light, dark, and diminished light, and the 4 phases of the day. Create a little bit of rhythm to that, and suddenly you realize that when you start your day, your wake point, whatever it is, don't worry about what's happened. Just get on with doing things. That means that when you get round to your allocated sleep time, is that you've given your brain every opportunity to go looking for that deep sleep in the first 2 cycles. So sleep starts to shift. Rather than thinking, I've got to get my 8 hours between sort of 11-ish, half 10, 11-ish, and 6:30, it doesn't mean you're going to sleep just because you've allocated the hours. So what it does is shift it to, well, what I'm trying to achieve here is an anchor point in the morning. The first 90 minutes of my day, I do this. Then after I do all of that sort of stuff. Then I get close towards this 11 o'clock period. I try to do things that allows me to enter that sleep state. And I've done some things today that allows my brain to go and look for that stuff. Once I get into the third cycle, the fourth and fifth cycle are about wake. So the rhythm I create during my day means I'll probably get through those cycles without any awakenings. But there's no point sleeping for 5 90-minute cycles or 8 hours if your brain is focused on light sleep. It won't get that deep sleep. And if it doesn't get that deep sleep, you still wake somewhat unrefreshed but ready to go. You'll still go and be a dentist. You'll still go and be a surgeon. You'll still go and be a student doing a PhD, or a parent, or an athlete going training. You'll still go and do these things. But what's missing is that 20% bit.
Yeah. What I found interesting was when you said that you set your anchor point in the morning. So that's obviously like your wake time. And for me, I have a bit of a bad habit of, like, some days, depending on what schedules permit, I'll, like, say get up at 5 a.m. and then another day maybe 6:30 a.m. because things don't mean I have to get up as early. So how important is it to set that anchor point every day at the same time and not shift it?
Wow, it sounds a bit like, wow, how do I do that, guys? I've got things and variables to do. I mean, we very much talk about in sport about HRV, heart rate variability as a weight, but it's also, these are human recovery variabilities as well. That's HRV for me as well. Is all these little factors that creep into our rolling 24 hours that sort of get in the way of this little process. And then once you sort of go, well, if I can minimize that as much as possible. So I think the bit is nothing more than me and Ethan. We live outside. It's not that long ago in our journey on this planet. We live outside. The sun starts to come round to our postcode, our zip code. It starts to bring light into our space because we're outside, asleep. That light then triggers various things like cortisol, adrenal from the adrenal gland. It also serotonin through the light receptors, through blue light in the daylight, to tell the brain to unsuppress everything. So it is a start to the day for the planet and us. And so the anchor point is quite critical, and it's a reset point, because what's happened is gone, right? Are you now doing things from the point of that? Are you getting exposed to lots of light, right? And the right type of light? That's triggering appetite, bowel and bladder, motivation, little mental challenging skills. That prepares you as a human being to go on into the rest of your cycles, your day, right? And without that start, then you're kind of dragging yourself through it, or you're interpreting how to deal with things, or you're missing positive things to take advantage of, or you're letting negative things have too much impact on you. Do you know what I mean? So the anchor point is your sunrise. It's your start to your day. And the way you find that out is, first of all, you think, if you had complete control, and Ethan and I, we sleep outside, we do our things, we're in complete control, right, of our days. There's a little thing called a chronotype, and it's used to be called owls and larks and stuff in the past, and everybody knows about it now today, so I won't bore them with that. But it is about how you react to that anchor point, you know, the start of the day, the sunrise. It is a little bit of a phase delay on internal clock setting and serotonin production, things like that. So if you're a morning type, then your anchor point, your natural sunrise is probably going to be something like, you know, 5:30, 6 o'clock, 6:30, 7 o'clock. Once you start going past 7 o'clock, that's like midday for a morning type, right? A night timer doesn't react to that natural sunrise point, that early anchor point. They're thinking more like 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, right, as their start to their day. So some people have to drag themselves into the day because they live in an AM as well, and some people can start it very naturally. So that's why it's, then you apply your occupation, or you apply lectures, you're a student or whatever it is, to it, and you go, well, I'm a morning chronotype. If I had complete control, I'm sort of naturally waking around 6 o'clock ish. So that's my anchor point. Then when I bring along an occupation that says I've got to work night shifts, wow, then I'm thinking, how's that going to affect me before I even accept the job? If I get a job that says I don't have to start work till 12 o'clock midday, I'm still going to wake up at 6. I can't put the alarm on for 11:30. That doesn't work. So you kind of realize that this anchor point is not like, oh, you've got to wake up at this time every day. But what it does, it creates this 16 90-minute cycles. So if your anchor point's 6:30, like I said, because that's your morning chronotype, that's your occupational okay, it's a good place to start your day, then you're going to wake in your 16th cycle between 5 and 6:30, right? You're not going to wake exactly on 6:30. You know, the alarm might be there to protect you from that, but you might wake, you know, 5:30, 6 o'clock, 6:15. Well, that's all right, because it's your 16th wake cycle, right? Yeah. So then you've got 5 o'clock. So you go back from 6:30 to 5 o'clock, 5 o'clock into 3:30, 2 a.m., 12:30, 11, right? 9:30. So you've got these little subconscious timings, Ethan. So when you sort of look at your variabilities, oh, I need to get up a bit earlier, what you start to think is, keep your rhythm. Keep your rhythm. Your brain likes rhythm. So all you're doing for a period of time, you're saying 5 o'clock is your anchor point, not 6:30, right? But the timings stay the same. It's 5 into 6:30, 6 into 8. The timings stay the same from your anchor point. All you're doing is waking yourself up at an earlier cycle, at 5, okay, right? And that may be too early for you in your mindset of getting to that lecture or getting to do something, because you could basically just do 6 o'clock or 6:15, put the alarm on a little bit earlier because you need to get going a little bit quicker. But if you keep some rhythm, it really, in my interpretation of it, then when you move out of that and go back to your natural 16th cycle at 6:30, then you and your brain can very easily just readapt. So you imagine 7 days in an elite athlete's world, and they've got training, they've got some sort of periods of recovery days, they've got games at 8 o'clock at night into 2 o'clock in the morning before they get home, they've got flights maybe, they've got travel. When you look at all of that stuff going on, there's no way you can factor in, get your 8 hours every night. So what you have to do is go, that's okay, because we'll wake at 5. there. On Monday, we'll wake at 5. On Tuesday, we'll wake at 5. On Wednesday, we'll wake at 5. But then on Thursday, we'll go back to putting the alarm on at 6:30, because we're shifting it. But I might wake up earlier, but don't worry, don't start your day. And then by Friday, it's back to there. By Saturday, it's back to normal. And I'm going to get home at 2 o'clock in the morning. Well, great. It's fine. Cycle, wait for that third, fourth, fifth, and so 3:30 into 5 into 6:30, wake. But then balance it, which is a bigger conversation, with a polyphasic sleep approach where midday and late afternoon becomes moments where you can regain your recovery. And that's how you start to look at it, and it changes that whole process. Big answer to your question, sorry.
What I found interesting was when you brought in the controlled recovery periods, or CRPs, into the book. Mm-hmm. And it's not something I've ever really thought of doing, because obviously conventional ways say sleep your 8 hours, you're going to feel perfect, you're going to go about your day as normal. Uh-huh. And for me, I tend to find if I nap in the day, I wake up a bit sluggish, slow. It takes me a while to get back into things. Mm-hmm. But then the way you were describing it is actually, it doesn't mean to sleep in this controlled recovery period. It's more about taking time off for the mind to sort of recover and reset. So what kind of things can people be doing to get these CRPs in through the day?
Well, knocking back to earlier, there's these things that, I found out, napping. What's napping about? Well, it's this 26-minute thing, and pilots might use it. Okay. And when does it normally happen? Well, because midday, or, the graveyard slot in business or schooling, straight after lunch, you hardly hear the lecture or the sales pitch, because it's a siesta period, it's a slump. What's that all about? Well, you can fall asleep behind the wheel of a car or a truck on an autobahn or a motorway. What's that about? Why would you even think about doing that? You can pass out on a train with all your personal belongings, with everybody around you don't even know, because you've just gone. So it's kind of, what does that all mean, right? And how does that all come together? And it means that up until electric light back in the 30s hit the planet properly, we never had any one block sleep approach. There was no sleep-wake cycles for humans in one block, monophasic, which is our 8 hours at night, right? It was always multiphasic. So there's biphasic, triphasic, multiphasic. There's the Uberman, which is like 6 phases a day, right? So when you sort of look at that, you can go, well, I can find my way within the constraints of what we know, not making things up. Science is there for a reason. So within that, what I'm looking at is 30% of my 24 hours, aka 8 out of 24, 30% of that needs to be in recovery, right? Now we've got a nocturnal period in the phase, in one phase. We've got the first phase of the day, the second phase of the day, and the third phase of the day, right? So we've got 4 phases. So within that, I want my 30+% worth of recovery. And some of that needs to be sort of a back-to-back, i.e. nocturnal set of cycles. But a lot of it is just me and my brain creating recovery moments at the right times, in the right way. So you chop your day up from the anchor point, you've got 16 90-minute cycles. So you ensure that your controlled recovery periods in the first 90 minutes of your day is about stepping outside and exposing yourself to light. Why? Because of that serotonin production, because of that blue light, because it triggers things to unsuppress you. Now you can recreate that with synthetic light if you're stuck in a flat or you can't get outside, things like that. It's about little mental challenges, that you could do, like ironing a shirt, for God forbid if anybody does that anymore. But it's it's little things like making your breakfast and making your lunch, or just doing something personal, and a bit like walking the dog, or doing just a little bit of exercising, whatever it might be, just to gently, bring that sort of CRPs, right? And you think the second 90 minutes, I can talk to you, and I get a real relationship with what 90 minutes feels like. I don't have a wristband going off, it's like, oh, more control. What I do is have a nice relationship. So what you then know is that if I'm focused on something, even if it's looking at the laptop or speaking to you or doing something, studying, whatever it is, that's all my brain is processing. Yeah, it's focused on that. So it processes and creates the various emotions and various functionalities to adapt to what's going on. If I just move and look out of that window, my garden window there, if I just stop and look out of that window, and whatever it is, visualization, let's keep it like that. But I just sit there just for a couple of minutes, it's amazing. It's like, wow, you jump on your bike, your static bike, or you go and sit in a room and just or stay exactly where you are right now, but just listen to some sensory stuff, music, whatever it is. It's all these little tiny things. If I've got a hydration bottle on my desk, because we'd love to do that, don't we? Is a half fill it. Why half fill it? I've filled it for the amount of hydration I need for the next, 2 hours, and I need to drink all of that to make sure I'm hydrated. Yeah, but half fill it. Why? Because once you've emptied it and you've still got another halfway to go because it's only half full, then go somewhere,
Get
moving. Half fill it again, right?
Yeah.
And maybe that's by a window, which we can come on to. Maybe that's by a window. And in those couple of minutes, right, now I come back and go, hi, Ethan. And there's clarity. There's answers to your questions that are more precise. Makes more sense to your audience. We're not wasting any valuable time. I'm enjoying the next bit rather than feeling it's going on and on and on. So CRPs, you can turn them into, when you look at that 90-minute stuff, right? 16 90-minute cycles. And the objective is your 5 90-minute cycles, 7.5 hours. But what you can do is look at your own personal profile, what you're trying to achieve at any moment, and say, right, 11 into 6:30, that's 5 90-minute cycles, fine. But actually, what I like to do is take some pressure off the third phase of my day, right? This is like that evening bit into sleep. So what I'll do, instead of 11 into 6:30, I'll go 12:30, right? And by 12:30, it releases a 90-minute cycle in phase 3. What I do need is I'm going to go 4 cycles in 6 hours. Maybe I can sleep all the way through that, gathering all the deep sleep in the first cycle, and then off I go. I do these things, these little tiny little couple of minute CRPs, micro CRPs, just look out the window, whatever. But then what I also introduce, because I'm a morning chronotype, is a 30-minute controlled recovery. And that's 30% of 90 minutes. And what I do is, this is not about napping. This is a 30-minute period, and within that 30-minute period, I might microsleep. I might snooze for whatever. I can do it anywhere. Anywhere. I don't have to be in bed or in a sleep pod. No, I can. So if I allocate that 20, 30 minutes late afternoon in my sort of 7th or 8th cycle, right? And that's for me. And if I do that, whether we sleep or not, that helps my brain. And that means the pressure comes off phase 3. So I'm not rushing around trying to get everything done before I got to get to bed at 11. I can create some pre-sleep stuff. I can create management about tech. I can do things that normally I put off and create excuses for because I don't have enough time to do it, and wow. So my 24 hours is 4 cycles, 12:30 into 6:30, nocturnal, maybe 6 or 9 little 2-minute CRPs, tiny little things. You just stand by a window or do this or just look in a different direction. And then that 20-minute, 30-minute late afternoon bit, right? Which nobody can take off me, right? And it's great because, almost if you tell somebody that you have a 30-minute cycle, napping, snoozers for losers, all that sort of stuff, come on, let's go. What they basically, you start to not tell lies, Ethan, but you camouflage this phrase. And so nobody will know that I am doing a 30-minute period every day, 7 days a week. Nobody will know that. Only my closest partner.
Yeah.
Because I can do it in a room while you're doing a lecture, right? Because I'm not actually trying to go, but I can let that go. So I can still hear what's going on. I can still react to everything that's going on, but I know I've just hit that sort of meditative state and nobody knows I'm even doing it, right? And the bit is when somebody goes, how are you so energetic 7 days a week? We didn't get in till 2 o'clock last night and we were up again at this. And you went riding your bikes at 9 o'clock last night because it's summer. And you didn't get back till 10:30. Weren't you knackered? And you had something to eat, didn't you? Yeah, and I had a cold beer. What? At that time of night? Yes, because my week is 35 cycles, 5 a day, with 6 to 9 little CRPs equals 42. 35 cycles, yes, but mine looks like 28 90-minute ones back to back with 7 30-minute slots. So when you asked me that question a long time ago, how do you talk to athletes? I go, well, what are we on? 35 cycles a week. It's 28 back-to-back nocturnal. It's 42 CRPs. And it's 7 30-minute CRPs. Oh, that's how we roll. And suddenly you start going, I'm worried about sleep on Sunday night and Monday morning. Why? Well, because I'm going out on Saturday and we've got a party and we've got this, we've got that, we've got a big exam or lecture on Monday morning. I'm even worrying about it now. And it's well, no, it just, you roll in, you roll out. And suddenly you just start forgetting about it. Knowing for a fact, let me just put you on the spot, but you don't have to answer the question. How many times do we don't even sleep at all, perceived? We've been up all night. We've maybe the night before was even bad, but we still go out and smash it, right? You're still expected to get that exam right.
Yeah.
So you're up all night with anxiety and stress, and you've not slept at all, and you're worried that if you don't sleep, you're not going to answer the questions right. But that's like worrying about a dentist who hasn't slept all night, and they're not going to put a needle in your mouth in the right way or hurt you or whatever. It's kind of, we do have that within the framework of rhythm and cycles. Within the framework, it's perfectly natural to consider that in that 24-hour period, trying to sleep, trying to force yourself to sleep, worrying about sleep is so counterproductive that if you just go, I'm not likely to even get to sleep that night or that period because there's too much going on, but do other things that are relative to recovery. Do you know what I mean? So it just completely changes your whole attitude. And when you stop worrying about sleep, what happens? Any coach will tell you, and I'm sort of like an imitating coach, I suppose. Any coach will tell you, if you want Ethan to change his behavior, to do something, to achieve something, don't tell him to do it. What you do is you take him on a little journey. He goes wandering off down here and doesn't even know what's going on. He comes over here and up there, down there, and then suddenly finds himself in a place where you go, oh, Ethan, how many hours sleep do you try and get? No, I don't. I'm on 34 cycles. Oh, that's interesting. Let's look at the video 2 years ago where you were absolutely fixated on this stuff. And now look at you. Did you sleep last night? No. But I did these things. Oh, cool. Yeah, I'm absolutely cool. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I used to be a really bad obsessive of so I'd have like bedtime, say bedtime's 10:30, and it get to 11 p.m. I check the time, I'm like, fuck not getting to sleep. Why am I not getting to sleep? And then
Yeah.
the anxiety starts creeping in, and then it's then 12:30, and I'm like,
Uh-huh.
fuck, I'm getting up at 6. I'm only going to get like 5.5 hours sleep. What's going on? And then it gets 1, 2, and I'm like, all right, the night's a write-off now. But then that ruins my whole next day. But this perspective that you've given of like, it's actually okay for that to happen every now and then. It's not the end of the world. Has become really interesting because it's really changed the way I think about how I sleep. And if I've not necessarily had my foot, say 5 cycles, now I can go into the next day and go, well, I can just get recovery periods in.
I think it's sort of fascinating, isn't it? And I really like the sort of, I don't class myself as a generation that's not got anything to offer, but there is that sort of next generation completely immersed in 24/7, and it continues to create amazing things for us, but also quite scary. So we're still learning of how to develop our relationship with all this sort of stuff. But it's absolutely fascinating in it when you start to highlight it like that, because I think when you start to stop worrying, every time we shift, we have things like daylight saving time, don't we? I mean, we're all aware of it on the planet, but not every country gets anywhere near it, right? It's a very small majority of people who have this seasonal shift with times. We know what it's called. It's called seasonal affective disorder. It's because of our relationship with light in certain seasons, winter and summer. Now, it wasn't created for human performance. So why haven't we got rid of it totally?
Yeah.
Because it's wrong. It's like trying to be on a treadmill with your Wellington boots on. Get rid. There are trainers. You know what I mean? Let's get better at this. Because you're losing hours of sleep all the time, if you think of it like that. So try and shift it so you don't worry about winter and summer. Well, how many times do we all get, oh my God, the temperature, it's the summer, I can't get to sleep, it's too hot. What? Oh, it's too hot in the bedroom. Oh God, I can't sleep because it's too hot. And I go, what, for the next, month? It's going to be a bit warm. What about when it's really cold?
Yeah.
So you get fixated on these things. I don't worry about temperature shifts. I don't worry about seasonal changes. What I'm concentrated on is my natural rhythm as a human being with the sun rolling around the planet. There's things outside of my control, like daylight saving time and occupations and all sorts of stuff. But within that, I try to keep a nice natural rhythm. So when the summer comes along and it's still light at 10 o'clock at night, I enjoy it.
Yeah.
Because I put an extra CRP in midday, as well as my late afternoon CRP, so I can smash it on my mountain bikes with Ethan at 10 o'clock at night up the mountains, and it's still sunny, because I've shifted it within my clock. And when the winter comes round, boy, I know exactly what to do, because my start to my day is 6:30, but it's dark outside. The sun hasn't even come up yet. It's dark at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Oh my God. So I don't care that it goes dark at 4 o'clock. It's still the 4 o'clock in my 16 cycle. And all I do is shift my behavior to increase, just to keep the level of light there as if it was the same. And then shift it and shift it and shift it. So suddenly you just stop worrying about it. So people have stopped asking me those questions anymore because they don't get an answer.
So I want to ask some important questions because I think the way you phrased it as, so when we wake, it's post sleep. So post sleep is like, I think obviously it's where you set yourself up for the day and also for sleep in the evening. So what are 3 things we should be doing first thing when we get up?
The first thing is identify with this anchor point, right? It's you might be an AMer, you might be a PMer. You have an occupation, you have something that drives your day about when you start it. But that relation, whether my day has to start at 12 o'clock midday, I know my anchor point is more relative to my chronotype, right? So find what that is. Try and find it as, I like to think on the hour or half an hour, because it's so easy to subconsciously keep those timings in your head without worrying about it, right? If you start thinking 6:15, 6:17, you're not creating it. So 6 o'clock or 6:30, 5:30 or 6 o'clock, think like that. So get your anchor point in and know that is not just a wait time. It's not just an alarm time. This is you creating your sunrise, because the vast majority of us live inside, right? We're not reacting to that sunrise, and it changes throughout the season. Anchor point, number one. Chronotype, number two. If you are an AMer, you get the curtains open, or you've got a little dawn wake simulator lamp by your bed that recreates sunrise for you with the right light. Once you get going, then you know that that sort of chronotype is stimulating you to enjoy the best part of your day. And then it goes wrong early evening, right? Where you think about you want to go to bed. And the PM chronotype doesn't want to start the day. So they drag themselves into the day. So once you understand you've got a sort of anchor point and your chronotype, then the things that you do in that first sort of 60-90 minute period is critical for getting you going, right? So the AM can get into it a little bit quicker because they're reacting to this process a little better, and the PM is being dragged, so they need to adjust their post routine relative to their chronotype. But that's one. And the third one is light. It always has been, it always will be. We use light therapy in all sorts of ways through the winter periods or traveling and time zones. It can reset clocks because it creates a trigger for things like from the adrenal gland, cortisol, and adrenaline, and serotonin. It creates a melatonin clock from when you get exposed to blue light. Then sort of 12 hours later, we like to start producing melatonin, which has this unsuppressed, suppressed relationship with 24 hours, right? So you're not going to eat, you're not going to fuel up and hydrate if you're still in a sleep state for a PM, right? The alarm can go off at 6:30, but you just keep hitting the snooze button, right? So you're not going to get into that hydration, appetite, bowel and bladder mental challenge thing quickly without light going on. And the AM are the same. So you can say, you know, there's a number of post things that you can do, little mental challenges, bit of exercise, get outside, things like that. But if you're not exposing yourself to light, then those things are going to be more challenging and more likely to become excuses why you didn't do it. And I think that when we started to sort of investigate this a long time ago, right, it was sort of, how do we change somebody's perception about light? And so I just grabbed a little light meter. Well, jump in the app store, a little free Lux light meter, LUX lumens. And within that, it's just non-scientific, but it's just using my camera to put a little dial on my phone, and it's just showing the lux levels, right? And then I give you a little bit of an idea that daylight can be anything up to 100,000 lux. Inside that, there's blue light, which is amazing because it provides triggers and energy for all of us. An average human outside all the time in around 80, 100,000 lux would get an average around 10,000 lux, looking up, looking down, you know, into midday, into sunset, that sort of stuff, an average of 10,000 lux exposure. So if you start to think, well, you know, what about 1,000 lux every 90 minutes, an average? So you got to be quite high and low to get that average. And then suddenly you start wandering around your house, and where you're sat right now, Ethan, and you start to go, wow, there's windows there and the sun is shining because I'm in the UK and it's early morning. There's no curtains. The daylight is coming into my office. You can see it up there on the wall. But it's measuring 234 lux where I'm standing right, even in front of a blue light laptop.
Yeah.
185, right? If I just put my arm over there next to that window, right, I'm less than a meter in the same space.
Yeah.
By that window, it's now over 3,000 lux.
Wow.
Now, if I step outside, just put my arm outside the window, you know, It could be
Yeah.
70, 80,000 lux right now. Now, you don't think it as being dangerous. Obviously, you know all about skin and all that sort of stuff. What it is that light is creating so many things in you that really provides everything about your motivation to do something, alertness, decision making, happiness, how you react to things, your appetite, this, how well you sort of like, oh, my little 30-minute CRP is amazing and nobody's going to stop me doing it. It creates positivity. It creates all sorts of stuff. It creates, hydration bottles halfway filled. And you suddenly go, wow. And what you probably notice on my other desk over there in the window is a lamp.
The lamp.
And that lamp, when anybody looks into it, tap it in your browser, if you see any light therapy lamp, it produces 10,000 lux. Why? And that's just what I said. So certainly the relationship. Here is a product called a light therapy tool. It produces 10,000 lux. Now you know why. Because your average exposure would be at the level of 10,000 lux. So if I switch that on, I've been sat here with you and I'm in 200 lux. That's what we call melatonin land. That means the brain is being told by the production of melatonin, because we're in low light, to suppress me when I'm trying to be active and professional.
Yeah.
So that whole rhythm and everything else is just in the first part of your day. If you can't get outside, get a lamp by the side of your bed, or very much think, like when you're going through buildings and when you're going into your office, that that if you get up, have some breakfast, move around a little bit, and then go and sit in your office with your laptop and the lights are on, yeah, you're not waking up at all.
Yeah.
You're not charging in the slightest. I mean, don't even think about trying to work in that space. You've got to get your light levels up. So those little CRPs we were talking before, what do they look like? Turning right when you go down a building. If I'm walking down that building by the windows, I know, because I had my little lamp out last week, that's like 3,000 or 4,000. Look, so my average has just shifted. So I'm balanced,
Yeah.
I've got a balanced relationship with this stuff. Now, whether you can pull that apart scientifically, I don't care, Ethan. I know that if we get that better relationship, wow, life seems to make more sense if me and Ethan go and sit, on the mound or on a bench or by the river or in the garden or just take a walk. Life seems to find its way of going, it's not that bad. It's doable, it's workable, it's achievable. Don't let the anxiety and stress factors make it even worse. Try and put it in balance. Now, is that because we're walking around outside in the fresh air? Maybe. Is that because we're exposed to 70,000 lux and serotonin being produced quickly? What is it? Well, there's enough to tell us that's what's going on. So that's what happens is if you got your blackout blinds and the curtains shut, the alarm goes off, you walk into the bathroom, you walk into the kitchen, all that light is less than 500 lux or less. You then get, you go to work, you go to the uni, you go whatever it is, you move and you've got all the way to midday and your average exposure was in the hundreds, not in the thousands. Yeah. Then why would you expect your brain to work out the answer to that question?
To function at a high capacity, it's just
How
not
would you
possible.
expect it to do it, And it's a bit like, I think everybody understands, and it's like my answers to your question, which I'm actually doing on purpose a little bit to make the point. I could have answered this question much quicker with a bit more clarity, a bit more specific, and leave you with the key takeaways. Right? But I'm waffling. And that means I'm a morning chronotype. And in the morning, if I get it right, 2 + 2 = 4. No reason to question that, right? In the afternoon, if I've not been careful, 2 + 2 = 4, I think. I need to just double check that. What type of 2 plus 2 equals?
Yeah.
You know, suddenly that piece of content turns into 300 pages instead of 150. The answer to that question, I actually answered it, but it got messed up in all sorts of other stuff. Somebody else can't see what the answer was.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Trying to
yeah.
exaggerate a little bit, but in really 1% marginal gains type of world, and sometimes it can be quite significant. It can be a real game changer when you look back as to how quickly somebody does something or how quickly somebody reacts to something, and just a few months later how different that is, simply because they switched a lamp on.
Yeah. For me, it's because I'm an AMer, so it's like when I'm, say, writing a review or starting to work on my thesis, what have you, the best work I can produce is always in the morning. Whenever I try and write after midday, I feel like it takes me 4 hours to get 2 words out. Like there's just not a chance of getting anything out. But
you're on a journey. And this is what I love to hear. You asked me ages ago, what was it like a couple of decades ago, bumping into Alex Ferguson? This type of conversation was nuts. It had absolutely no relevance to anybody, but there you are now, describing the importance of short, little couple of minute breaks for you as you go into your 30-minute one late afternoon, because you can get to there. It's moving beyond that that's your problem, right?
yeah,
Because so if you have to do an exam early evening, right, that 30-minute slot that you've got in there would always not random in isolation, like you said before. When I try to nap, it feels crap. You can't just do it every now and again because you're knackered. It's a consequence of a bad approach. It always happens, but then you go, wow, I'm all right because I'm getting my 30 minutes. I might just sit somewhere really quiet and listen to some music this time because I've got an exam there, but I know it's helping me adjust and everything else. So you really start to get a beautiful balance, and you spot it with you reflect very carefully about who are your friends and your colleagues and lecturers, and you start to be able to spot the signs, and you go, aha, my mate Chris is a night timer. He wants to go to the gym at 8 o'clock at night, not at 6 o'clock in the morning. So you go, well, we want to do it together because I like Chris. So okay, I need to do this. You want to go to the gym at 6:30, and I'm Chris, so I need to get up at 5, so I can get lots of light. I can get it. So when I'm at the gym with Chris at the wrong time of day, it's not having a counterproductive effect on me, but I'm able to adjust it within that rhythm. It's fascinating how suddenly, if you can take 5%, 10%, it's far more significant. But if you just think 5%, 10% out of that 30 odd percent you allocate to sleep every day, every week, every season, every year, many big, you don't do anything at all that qualifies 30%. Eating, drinking, exercising, working, studying, you don't do anything to that level every day. So if you can grab 5% or so out of that for you and make it work for you, and not take it away, but optimize your recovery, wow, I'd like that person.
It's such an interesting subject. I just want to ask a couple more questions because obviously I know you're strapped for time. But so caffeine and caffeine intake, when should we consume it in the morning, and when should we cut it off in the afternoon and evening?
I think the thing is about all of this, some really good friends of mine over the years have always been into nutrition and sports science and nutrition, and we come across it a lot. So there's a lot of science. There's also a lot of shifting in mindset about diets. Vegans and gluten-free's always been there, or fats or proteins, whatever. So there is that sort of element. I think where you sit yourself is a healthy, balanced everything. It's understanding what healthy and balanced means. You don't just make it up, like 2 donuts and a bag of chips is a handful. But you have an understanding what healthy balance means, and you need things that make you smile. Don't avoid the slice of birthday cake. You know, um, you don't have to avoid the takeaway. You don't have to. It's all within that sort of balanced arena, and that's where sort of caffeine sits. It's like a glass of wine with a friend in a meal at the end of the day. It can be reflective, it can be soothing, it can be nice. It's a cold beer or something like that, a game or whatever. But 3 or 4 or a bottle, no. So it's kind of the caffeine for me, working with lots of professional cyclists. And in the professional cycling world, stopping for an espresso is part of the culture. You see all the lycra-based cyclists wandering around our towns, and you stop at cafes and you get your bike mended and you have an espresso and a coffee, in general terms. We know caffeine, the body doesn't mind caffeine, but in an understandable way. It is a performance enhancer. We need a little bit of help, a pat on the back, or a good glug of water when we're a bit dehydrated. It's the same thing. It's about a little bit of a balance. The way I see it is, either don't do it at all, which is like anything. If you want, cut out sugars, cut out salts, do this, do that, whatever it is, stick to whatever you're doing and keep it healthy and balanced. And caffeine has a half-life of 6 to 7 hours. So I put 200 grams into you, and 3 hours later it's 100 grams, right? And 6 hours later there's nothing, right? So you kind of have that relationship of how and when to use it. What I don't like is people using heavy amounts of caffeine in the morning to get them going, whatever that might be, energy drinks or the coffee and the tea, whatever it is. Caffeine hangabouts in so many products, even if it's not stated, like painkillers, So, and even decaffeinated tea. It just says that they've decaffeinated it the best they could. So I like to see it as, use it as a balance. So if you chop your day up into 90-minute cycles, 16 of them. So in the first 90 minutes, you might use caffeine to help that process of getting going, particularly if you're a PMer, right? You need a little bit of help, right? Because this is a difficult time. So don't see it as negative, just see it as a little bit. Maybe you can find some other things that will do that, but we're talking caffeine, right? So if I know how much caffeine is about, a grande in Starbucks, I think, was about 300 milligrams of caffeine at one point. I don't know what it is now, but there you go. So just have an understanding about the caffeine, and then you start thinking 150 grams of caffeine is my little starter for the day. It helps me go to here. But then 2 cycles, which is 3 hours, 2 90-minute cycles, 3 hours. Here's the rhythm. Here's the pattern. It's down to half that.
Yeah.
So maybe you can just top it up again if you want, back to there 3 hours later. Then you can start thinking, well, if I take on lots of caffeine in the first phase of the day and then stop doing it from lunchtime, well, 6 or 7 hours later from sort of midday, you're coming down off a big high, right? Now that's not good for phase 3, and it's not good for your brain. So I always think is that it's much better to have that sort of relationship that you make a choice. It works for your rhythm, your pattern, and everything else, to sort of take on board 300 milligrams of caffeine in the first couple of cycles of your day. A little coffee, a little tea, a little drink, or whatever it is. You're happy with that. You then have a little break from it for a couple of cycles, and it's gone down to 150 now. So you know where that. Then you're happy to top it up a little bit, because getting into the evening for you might be a little bit difficult. Oh, but don't take it, it'll keep you awake. No, shut up. I'm just topping it up. Then I go into phase 3, and then I've got a couple of cycles left before, or a cycle left before my targeted sleep time at 12:30, whatever it is. So if I started to decrease my level of caffeine, but not taking it out altogether, because keep a balance, keep a rhythm, and then you take it out. By the time you enter sleep, there's a little bit of happy caffeine knocking around, but at a much lower level. And by the time you've gone through the final 90 minutes into your sleep, and then the first 90 minutes, it's gone. Because you'd already got down to the half-life before you got anywhere near the last 2 cycles of your night. So it kind of, and then it starts afresh by the time they wake up in the morning. My 4 cycles in 6 hours, I'm pretty much caffeine free, so I can start that general process again. So yes, there are arguments.
Yeah, there's definitely a few.
I think if you choose to use it, right? If you choose to use it, then do it in that healthy, balanced way. Don't over excess it, and just say don't have caffeine after midday because it ruins your sleep. Well, that's fine-ish, but not if you're up at 1,000 milligrams before you get to midday.
Yeah, it's about
that's
about the load of it.
So I think it's always the bits that are missing. Don't do caffeine after lunch. That's positive. Yeah, but can you just define my caffeine approach to start with? Yes. Well, then it doesn't make sense to do that because I'm only getting up to, 200 milligrams of caffeine by midday. So then stopping it at midday is going to have absolutely no effect on how I sleep because it's having no effect on anything.
Yeah,
that's it. It's neither here nor there. So it's always those little bits that are missing when we get advice about stuff. That is always worthwhile when you read something or you see something like get your 8 hours or caffeine and this and everything else is just make sure that you've used everything you possibly can to really understand what that means, because normally in isolation they don't do you any good.
Yeah, it's how can you make it specific to you? Like for me, I'm not a big caffeine. I used to be a big caffeine fanatic, but I'm not anymore. So it's like I'll have one coffee maybe 2 hours after I've woken up because that gives me that period to wake up. Then that one coffee that'll do me for the day. It's a nice little pick me up like mid morning. That it just sort of floats me through then, and then from there, like I find for myself specifically to me that if I have caffeine in the afternoon, that will affect my sleep. So I don't do it. But for someone like, say, for you, you may have caffeine at 3 p.m. but can sleep like a baby come 9. Like it's always specific to the person, isn't it?
Well, it's metabolism, it's all sorts of stuff, and it also is reflective of what's going on in your world, right? And it's sort of, I say it's getting that better relationship with a healthy, balanced, rhythmic approach to your 24 hours, rather than the ups and downs and highs and lows. Sounds very simplistic, but we've tried to make it simplistic,
Yeah. So I've got one final question for you because I know you obviously have you're struck for time. So the final question is, how would you, and specifically actually, how would you like your work to be remembered?
Wow. My work. As I suppose it's always been about reward from the impact of my endeavors on other people. Athletes, yeah, fine, but students, nurses, doctors. You listen to my Audible book. When the book came out in 2016, I thought that's good night for me, because it was non-clinical, non-academic. It was a bit maverick. It was a bit, but I was given the confidence to write it by the publishers anyway. And I think what that is about pilots and surgeons and nurses and politicians and kids and young athletes and old athletes. And the reward is that it's really helped them put some perspective on this health pill of sleep. And for some, it may have saved their lives,
Yeah.
Whereas you think about that subject of sleep, Ethan, earlier on, is like somebody's perception of sleep, but you wouldn't think about it being able to balance mental and physical, mental health and well-being issues that could be quite serious, So I think how would I like to be remembered I started I started a journey for every generation beyond me to make sure that this health pillar is never ignored again. Is looked into in is really looked into so that we don't just have this generic stuff. So my reward would be that that everything I have done is probably helping people deal with some of the most basic and common issues which seem to be growing like mad, and that area can really help them, and they don't realize it. They just don't realize it, and that's a sad thing for anybody to wander through life, is that they can go into that space like we've been talking about today, whether it's a little CRP or whether it's this or whatever, or a little thing, whatever, that they can go in there and really make a change, and it could be game changing for them. So I think that's it. I don't know whether I answered your question, but I would just hope people reflect on it, that maybe I kicked the door down a bit and opened it up for everybody.
No, I really like how you've gone about talking about sleep, because it breaks down a lot of the stigmas that we have with it. And also, it's now, from what I've seen of your work, to me, it's now not this scary thing. If I don't get 8 hours, then there's going to be all these bad things that happen to my body that can happen in just a week. It's now a case of
fear.
Yeah.
You coach with fear.
Yeah. So it's like it's broken down in a really good way. And obviously you can get the book. It'll be in the link in the description. But if anyone wants to find you online, where can they find you?
It's simply sportsleepcoach.com. Unfortunately, if you tap Nick Littlehales in your browser, you'll get lots of things. You can find me through that, because there's lots of stuff out there. But sportsleepcoach.com, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn. We've got handles in there all over the place. There's loads of information on the website. We produce more free content than we do anything you got to pay for. You listen to the Audible course. You can read a book. You can listen to some blogs. You can podcasts and things like that. You can really start your journey in a very sort of self-coaching way, to be honest. I think, I'm not being biased, but I'd probably listen to your podcast, Ethan, or read my book or listen to my book before you go off into the world of sleep science. It is important, and there's lots of good stuff there, but don't go the other way around, because it'll probably scare you. Or it won't do anything for you. So it's kind of read my book and then go into the science, then it kind of works. But or just get on the website and see what you can do.
Lovely. Thank you for your time.
No problem.
I hope you enjoyed this episode with Nick Littlehales. You'll find all his stuff in the description below, including his website and his book, Sleep. So make sure to check it all out, and remember to please subscribe, like, and share each episode with someone who may be interested in that particular topic. Remember, there are weekly episodes coming out on a Monday and clips from podcasts coming out on Thursdays, both at 6 a.m. GMT and 5 p.m. Australian Eastern Time. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you in the next one.